In Las Vegas's T-Mobile Arena, a silver-haired man in a plain button-down shirt was about to be mocked on live television. A routine championship celebration turned volatile when UFC phenom Tyrick "The Ghost" Maddox grabbed the mic and called out Chuck Norris with a smirk. "I'll knock you out, Grandpa." Chuck Norris wasn't your typical celebrity guest. For over 60 years, he was a world champion martial artist, an elite Air Force veteran, and the man who trained presidents known worldwide for never needing to raise his voice to silence a room. When Tyrick publicly challenged him to a fight, he had no idea he was baiting a storm. Chuck accepted the challenge and responded with discipline, patience, and mastery that would shatter Tyrick's arrogance and ignite a global conversation. What began as a clout-chasing stunt would become a modern-day fable. The fight world and a cocky champion would never be the same after Chuck Norris taught the meaning of respect in the only language the young man understood: combat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A brutal punch echoed across the arena, sending the fighter crashing to the mat. The crowd gasped as the referee dove in, checking if the man could even move. But the winner was already parading, around arms raised high, grin stretched wide. The T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas pulsed with raw energy, every seat filled, every voice blending into a deafening roar that echoed off the walls. Floodlights beamed down onto the polished octagon at center stage. Cameras flashed like lightning as fans shouted from every corner. Some waved banners. Others leaned forward on the edge of their seats, eyes locked on the fighters. In the middle of this chaos sat Chuck Norris, calm and composed, ringside in the VIP section. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans, he did not move. No entourage. No attention-seeking. Yet eyes naturally shifted toward him. He sat effortlessly steady, one hand resting loosely on his knee, the other by his side. No grin. No cheers, just focus. His weathered face, now framed with silver hair, bore the quiet dignity of a man who had nothing left to prove. Beside him sat Elena Norris, his granddaughter, her military-trained posture a mirror of his own. Her dark hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp and assessing. She leaned toward him. "You sure you want to stay for the main event?" she asked. "These guys are getting rowdier." Chuck simply nodded. "I accepted the invitation. I'll see it through." All eyes inside the octagon, however, centered on one man, Tyrick "The Ghost" Maddox. An undefeated rising star, not just for his skill but for how he won. Arrogant, flashy, ruthless. He thrived on spectacle, lived to dominate not only his opponent, but the crowd. Every move he made seemed calculated to provoke a reaction. He bounced on his heels, glancing at the cameras, soaking in the attention. Fans either loved him or hated him, but no one ignored him. Tyrick stood over his fallen opponent, a veteran fighter named Diego Santos, who lay motionless on the canvas. The referee pushed Tyrick back, medics rushing in. Diego's eyes fluttered open, but the damage was done. "Another one down!" Tyrick shouted, strutting around the cage. "Who's next? Who's got the balls to step to the Ghost?" In the commentator's booth, Dana Reyes adjusted her headset. A former fighter herself, she knew the line between confidence and arrogance. "And Tyrick "The Ghost" Maddox remains undefeated, ladies and gentlemen. That's 15 straight wins, 12 by knockout. But I have to say, that post-fight display leaves something to be desired." Her co-commentator nodded. "He's got the skills, no doubt. But that showboating over Santos? That's not championship material." Dana's eyes narrowed. "And if you look at the VIP section, you'll notice a legend in attendance tonight. Chuck Norris, one of the most respected martial artists of all time, watching this new generation. Wonder what he's thinking right now." The camera panned to Chuck, who maintained his stoic expression. Inside the octagon, Tyrek grabbed the microphone from the announcer. His face gleamed with sweat, chest heaving with adrenaline. "You all seeing this?" he shouted. "This is what a real champion looks like. Not these has-beens they keep sending my way." Tommy Steele Kavanaugh, Tyrek's trainer, moved toward the cage door, a mix of pride and concern on his weathered face. "Easy, kid," he muttered. "You won. That's enough." But Tyrek wasn't listening. His eyes had found Chuck Norris in the crowd. A new hunger flashed across his fascinate for victory, but for something more. Legacy. Validation. His gaze locked onto the legend. "Well, look who we got here." Tyrek's voice boomed through the speakers. "Chuck Norris himself. The man, the myth." His tone shifted, dripping with mockery. "The senior citizen." A hush fell over sections of the crowd. Dana Reyes leaned forward in the commentary booth. "Oh, he's not going there. Tell me he's not going there." Elena's body tensed beside Chuck. "He's talking to you," she whispered. Chuck's expression remained unchanged. "You know, I grew up watching your movies, old man," Tyrek continued, pacing the cage like a predator. "All that spinning kick stuff. Cute for its time. But this," he gestured around the octagon, "this is real fighting. Not choreographed Hollywood BS." Cameras swung between Tyrek and Chuck. The arena's energy shifted, uncomfortable murmurs spreading through the crowd. "So I'm thinking," Tyrek's voice grew louder, feeding off the tension. "Why don't you come in here and show us if any of that legend status is real? Or are you just another old guy living off past glory?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Some fans booed, others cheered, thrilled by the audacity. Elena half rose from her seat, but Chuck placed a hand gently on her arm. Dana Reyes's voice cut through the broadcast. "What we're witnessing is unprecedented disrespect. Chuck Norris isn't just a movie star, he's a legitimate former world champion, a pioneer in American martial arts, and one of the most respected figures in combat sports." In the octagon, Tyrek wouldn't let up. "What's wrong, Grandpa? Too scared to stand up? Worried about breaking a hip?" He laughed, playing to the cameras. "Come on, the offer's open. I'll even go easy on you." "Maybe." Tommy Kavanaugh shook his head from outside the cage. "Enough, Tyrek. That's Chuck Norris, for Christ's sake." But Tyrek was in too deep. "You used to be a legend," he shouted directly at Chuck. "Now you're just old." The crowd erupted, some in outrage, others in wild excitement. Social media was already exploding with clips of the confrontation. Security staff shifted nervously, looking between Tyrek and Chuck. Through it all, Chuck Norris remained perfectly still. His expression neither angry nor intimidated, just watchful, assessing. The silence from him seemed to amplify Tyrek's words, making them sound hollow in the vast arena. Elena leaned close to her grandfather. "You don't have to take this," she whispered. "We can leave." Chuck's eyes never left Tyrek. "No," he said quietly. "Some things need to be heard." Dana Reyes spoke softly into her microphone. "And that's why he's Chuck Norris. Complete control, even when provoked. The question is, will he respond to this challenge? And if he does, what form will that response take?" Tyrek finally tossed the microphone aside and raised his arms, soaking in the mixed reaction from the crowd. As he exited the cage, he pointed directly at Chuck. "Think about it, old-timer. One round with me. Show the world what's left in that tank." As Tyrek disappeared down the tunnel, the arena buzzed with speculation. Chuck Norris stood slowly, adjusted his jacket, and with Elena at his side, made his quiet exit. He acknowledged no cameras, answered no questions, but something had been set in motion. Something that transcended the sport itself. It wasn't just a challenge, it was a collision of Airsoft values. And everyone knew Chuck Norris's silence wouldn't be the end of it. It was just the beginning. Chuck Norris's SUV pulled away from the T-Mobile Arena, the neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip painting streaks across its windows. Inside, Elena gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension that her grandfather didn't seem to share. "That was completely out of line," she said, checking the rearview mirror as if Tyrick's words might be physically following them. "You're a guest of honor, and he treats you like that? Someone should teach that kid some respect." Chuck gazed out the window, his reflection ghosted against the bright casino lights. "Everyone teaches something," he said quietly. "Some teach respect, others teach why it's necessary." Elena glanced at him. "You're not actually considering his challenge?" Chuck didn't answer directly. "What did you see in there, Elena?" "When he was calling me out." She frowned. "I saw an arrogant fighter drunk on his own hype." "Look deeper." Elena thought for a moment, recalling Tyrick's stance, his expressions between the insults. "Insecurity," she finally said. "He was practically begging for your attention. Validation from someone he claims is irrelevant." Chuck nodded. "And that's why this isn't just about a fight." By morning, the confrontation had gone viral. Every sports network ran the clip on loop. Tyrick's swagger, his pointed finger, the insults and Chuck's stone-faced silence. Social media exploded, with takes, memes, and predictions. In a downtown hotel suite, Tyrick scrolled through his phone, grinning at the headlines. "We're trending worldwide, Tommy." Worldwide. He tossed his phone on the couch and shadowboxed across the room, throwing fast combinations at imaginary opponents. Tommy Cavanaugh sat heavily in an armchair, looking less thrilled. "You picked a fight with Chuck Norris. Do you even understand who that man is?" Tyrick scoffed. "Some actor pushing 80 who made a career out of roundhouse kicks and bad one-liners. Before he was an actor, he was a 6-time world karate champion. Before that, he served in the Air Force. He's trained presidents, kid. He doesn't have fans, has disciples." "Had," Tyrick corrected, still bouncing on his toes. "Had disciples. Had championships. Past tense, Tommy. This is my era now." Tommy stood up, his weathered face creased with concern. "This isn't just about skill or age. You're missing the point entirely." "The point is exposure," Tyrick countered. "Every brand in the world is blowing up my agent's phone. The UFC can't buy this kind of publicity." His phone buzzed with a call. Tyrick answered, putting it on speaker. "Maddox. Turn on ESPN2. His agent's voice crackled. "Dana Reyes's show, now." Tommy grabbed the remote and flipped to the channel. Dana Reyes sat behind a desk, footage of last night's confrontation playing on a screen behind her. "What we witnessed goes beyond simple trash talk," Dana was saying. "This represents a fundamental clash of eras in martial arts and sports culture. On one side, we have Tyrick Maddox, undeniably talented but embodying the look-at-me mentality of today's social media fighters. On the other, Chuck Norris, man who never needed to tell you how good he was. You already knew." The camera pulled in tighter on Dana. But here's what's fascinating about Chuck's response last night. Silence. Complete silence. No retaliation, no visible anger. In an age where everyone feels compelled to clap back instantly, Chuck demonstrated something we rarely see anymore: the discipline to choose his moment. Tyrick snorted. Or he was scared speechless. Tommy shushed him. "Sources close to Chuck Norris tell me he hasn't spoken publicly about the incident," Dana continued. "But the question remains, will he accept the challenge? And should he? Chuck is 80 years old, far removed from competition. Tyrick is a 28-year-old champion at his physical peak." Dana leaned toward the camera. "But anyone counting Chuck out based on age alone has forgotten something crucial. Legends aren't just made of muscle and reflex. They're made of something far more enduring. The segment cut to a compilation of Chuck's fighting career tournament victories, movie scenes, training footage spanning decades. When it returned to Dana, her expression was serious. Respect can't be demanded. It must be earned. Some earn it with loud victories. Others, with quiet dignity. Last night gave us both approaches, side by side. Which one truly represents strength? That's the real question here. Tyrek clicked off the TV. Philosophical garbage. Strength is strength. I knock people out. End of story. Tommy shook his head. Kid, you're hearing but not listening. This isn't about whether you can beat Chuck in a fight. It's exactly about that, Tyrek interrupted. And the whole world's gonna see it happen. His phone rang again. The UFC president. Tyrek answered with a grin. Tell me you're setting it up. That afternoon, at a small private gym 30 miles from the Strip, Chuck moved through a series of precise forms. His movements were deliberate, economical, none of the flash that defined his movie career, just the core technique that had preceded it. Elena watched from a bench, a bottle of water in her hand. The UFC called again, she said. They're offering a modified exhibition match. 3 rounds, limited contact, full safety protocols. Chuck completed his form before responding. What else? Pay-per-view numbers they've never offered before. Full medical staff on standby. They're framing it as the legend versus the ghost. Respect on the line. Chuck toweled off his face. And they think that makes it acceptable? Granddad, you don't have to do this. No one expects you to fight a champion less than half your age. Walk away with dignity. Chuck looked at her, something shifting in his eyes. Is that what dignity means to you? Walking away? You have nothing to prove. This isn't about proving anything to anyone else. Then what is it about? Then, what is it? Chuck picked up his water bottle. Some lessons can only be taught in a language both parties understand. Elena studied him. You're actually considering it. I'm not just considering it, Chuck said quietly. I've already accepted. Elena's eyes widened. What? When? This morning. I called them myself. Why didn't you tell me? Chuck placed a hand on her shoulder. Because you would have tried to stop me. And some things need to happen, even when those who care about us don't understand why. That evening, the announcement broke across all media platforms. Chuck Norris would face Tyrek, the Ghost Maddox, in a special exhibition match, 3 weeks from today, at the same venue where the challenge had been issued. The press conference was scheduled for the following day. In his hotel room, Tyrek watched the news with a triumphant grin. Did I call it or what? He said to Tommy. The old man took the bait. Tommy didn't share his enthusiasm. You should watch some of his old fights. Study his technique. Tyrek waved him off. I don't need to study history. I make it. Pride comes before the fall, kid. Save the fortune cookies? We both know how this ends in me standing over another knockout, adding a legend to my highlight reel. Tommy looked at him for a long moment. You know what scares me? I think you actually believe that. Across town, at a quiet dinner with Elena and Doc Henry Bautista, the veteran ringside physician who had known Chuck for decades, the conversation took a different tone. Medically, you're in remarkable shape for a man your age, Doc Henry said, cutting into his steak. But that doesn't change the fundamental risk factors. Reaction time, bone density, recovery capacity, they all favor youth. I'm aware of the physiology, Henry. Then why accept? You've got nothing left to prove. Your legacy is secure. Chuck set down his fork. This isn't about my legacy. It's about his future. Elena exchanged a glance with Doc Henry. What do you mean? Tyrek has all the talent in the world. But he's missing what matters most. He fights for himself, for applause, for attention. He hasn't learned that true strength isn't about dominating others, it's about mastering yourself. And you think getting in the octagon with him will teach him that? Elena asked skeptically. I think he needs to see it up close, Chuck replied. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. Doc Henry leaned forward. Chuck, with all due respect, what exactly is your plan here? You can't match him speed for speed or power for power. A small smile crossed Chuck's face. Who says I need to? The next morning, the UFC headquarters in Las Vegas hosted the official press conference. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, and an energy that felt more like a championship bout than an exhibition. Tyrek arrived first, dressed in a flashy designer suit, entourage in tow. He played to the cameras, shadowboxing for photographers, signing autographs with theatrical flourishes. Chuck entered minutes later alone except for Elena wearing a simple black jacket over a button-down shirt. No fanfare. No entrance music. He took his seat at the table, nodded to the UFC president, and folded his hands in front of him. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. As the press conference began, Tyrek dominated the microphone, answering questions with practiced sound bites and occasional barbs directed at Chuck. Look, I respect what he did in his day, Tyrek said with a smirk that contradicted his words. But this is 2025, not 1975. The game has evolved. I'm just giving the fans what they want, a chance to see if the legend is real or just good marketing. When asked about his strategy, Tyrek flexed visibly beneath his suit jacket. I've got one plan. Put him to sleep. Respectfully. Of course. He winked at the cameras. Throughout it all, Chuck remained composed, answering questions directly but briefly. When finally asked why he accepted the challenge, he leaned slightly toward the microphone. There's a difference between hearing and listening, he said, his voice steady. Between seeing and understanding. Between fighting and knowing why you fight. A journalist followed up. Are you concerned about the age difference? About getting hurt? Chuck's response was simple. Pain is temporary. Lessons last forever. Tyrek rolled his eyes. More fortune cookie wisdom. Save it for the movies, old man. In the real world, the only language that matters is this. He held up a clenched fist. Chuck looked directly at him for the first time. That's where you're wrong, he said quietly. And that's why we're having this conversation. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the press conference concluded, the two men stood for the traditional face-off photo. Tyrek towered over Chuck, staring down with undisguised confidence. Chuck met his gaze without blinking, without posturing. Something flickered across Tyrek's fascia, momentary uncertainty, quickly masked by another cocky grin. He leaned in close. 3 weeks, Grandpa. Better get your affairs in order. Chuck's expression never changed. 3 weeks? He agreed. Just enough time. For what? Tyrek asked. For you to figure out what matters. Tyrek laughed it off. But as they left the stage, Dana Reyes noted what the cameras might have missed. Tyrek looked back at Chuck 3 times. Chuck never looked back once. The lines were drawn. The countdown had begun. And the echo of silence was about to break. Dawn broke over the Nevada desert, painting the rocky landscape in amber and gold. 20 miles outside Las Vegas, far from the neon and noise, a solitary figure moved through precise forms in the cool morning air. Chuck Norris breathed deeply, his movements flowing with a deliberate rhythm. No audience, no cameras, just the discipline that had defined his life for over 60 years. Each stance, each transition reflected decades of refinement. Nothing wasted. Nothing for show. The small training facility belonged to an old friend, private, secluded, analog in a digital world. Basic equipment, worn mats, walls lined with faded photos of fighters from another era. No sponsors, no branding. Just purpose. Elena arrived as Chuck finished his warm-up, carrying a duffel bag and 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early," she said, handing him one of the cups. "Old habit," Chuck replied, taking a sip. "Your grandmother used to say I was on military time, even decades after leaving the service." Elena set down her bag. "The UFC sent over the contract details. They're implementing special rules for the exhibition. Limited strikes, mandatory protective gear, referee with authority to stop the action at the slightest concern." Chuck nodded. "And Tyrek? Already rejected most of it. Says he won't participate in a neutered version of the sport. He wants real stakes, real consequences." "Of course he does." Elena studied her grandfather. "You knew he'd say that, didn't you?" Chuck smiled slightly. "Predictability can be a weakness, Elena. Remember that." She unzipped her bag, pulling out hand wraps and focus mitts. "So what's the plan?" "We've got 20 days to prepare for a fighter who's knocked out 12 opponents in 15 fights. A fighter in his prime, with every physical advantage. We don't prepare to match his strengths," Chuck said, beginning to wrap his hands with practiced precision. "We prepare to reveal his weaknesses." "Which are?" "The same as they were that night in the arena. He fights for the wrong reasons." Elena frowned. "Granddad, with all due respect, philosophical advantages don't stop a right hook." Chuck finished wrapping his hands and looked at her. "Put on the mitts. Let me show you something." For the next hour, Chuck worked with Elena in a series of drills not building power or speed, but timing and positioning. His movements were economic, precise. Never overextending, never wasting energy. "Fighting isn't about who's stronger or faster," he explained between combinations. "It's about who controls the space between. The distance. The timing." He slipped a mock punch from Elena, countering with a light tap to her ribs. "See? I didn't need speed for that. I needed patience." Elena nodded, beginning to understand. "You're going to counterfight him. I'm going to let him defeat himself." As they continued training, Doc Henry arrived, medical bag in hand. He watched from the doorway before approaching. "Looking sharp, Chuck," he said. "But I still need to check those vitals." Chuck nodded, taking a break, while Doc Henry performed his examination. Blood pressure, heart rate, reflexes. The physician's expression remained neutral, professional. "Well?" Elena asked when he finished. "Physically, he's exceptional for his age, but that's the key phrase, for his age." Doc Henry looked directly at Chuck. "You've got the heart and lungs of a man 20 years younger. But bone density, reaction time, recovery capacity, these aren't in your favor." Chuck toweled off his face. "I'm not planning to outmatch him physically, Henry." "Then what's your strategy?" "Because from a medical standpoint, I'm concerned." "The same strategy I've always used," Chuck replied. "Patience, discipline, understanding." Doc Henry shook his head. "Those are virtues, not tactics. In the right context, they're both." Meanwhile, across town at the UFC Performance Institute, Tyrek, the Ghost, Maddox, was putting on a show. His training session had been open to select media cameras, capturing every explosive combination, every dynamic movement. Tyrek worked with 3 different sparring partners, rotating them every round, overwhelming each with his speed and power. Between rounds, he played to the cameras, flexing and joking. His team had set up special lighting to highlight his physique, his technique. Everything amplified, everything performed. Tommy Cavanaugh watched from the corner, arms crossed. When the media portion concluded, he pulled Tyrek aside. "You're showing off for the cameras instead of preparing properly," he said bluntly. Tyrek gulped water, barely listening. "That's the game now, Tommy. Perception is reality." "No. Reality is reality." And the reality is you're fighting Chuck Norris in less than 3 weeks. You need to take this seriously. I am taking it seriously. I'm just not scared like you seem to be. Tommy's eyes narrowed. It's not fear, kid. It's respect. Something you could use more of. Respect is earned in the cage, Tyrek retorted. Not given out like participation trophies to guys who used to be relevant. That used to be relevant guy revolutionized martial arts in America. He fought when there were no big purses, no sponsorships, no Instagram followers. Tyrek toweled off his face. Different era, easier competition. Tommy shook his head in frustration. You know what? Keep thinking that. But at least do me one favor, watch some footage of his actual tournament fights. Not the movies. The real competition. Why? So I can laugh at some grainy old videos of karate guys wearing pajamas? So you can see what you're really up against. The movies are choreographed. His tournament fights weren't. There's a reason he went undefeated for 6 years. Tyrek waved him off. Fine. Send the links to my phone. I'll look at them tonight. But that evening, instead of studying footage, Tyrek hosted a party at a high-end Las Vegas club. Surrounded by admirers, he recounted his version of the confrontation with Chuck, each telling more exaggerated than the last. The old man was shaking. He told a group of Instagram influencers. You couldn't see it on camera, but trust me, he was terrified. Probably went home and Googled my knockout reel. The crowd laughed, drinks flowing, music pulsing. No one noticed Tommy slip out early, a look of concern etched on his face. As dawn approached, Tyrek finally returned to his suite, slightly drunk and completely confident. On a whim, he picked up his phone and searched for Chuck Norris's tournament fights. He found a compilation video grainy footage from the 1960s and early 70s. Chuck, young and intense, moving with lethal precision against opponents who seemed perpetually a step behind. No wasted motion, no flash, just clinical efficiency and focus. Tyrek watched for a few minutes before closing the video with a dismissive gesture. Different era, he muttered to himself. Prehistoric. But something about those old clips lingered in his mind as he drifted off to sleep. The calm in Chuck's eyes before each exchange. The absolute certainty. The control. The next morning, at his private gym, Chuck worked with Elena on a different aspect of preparation recovery and energy conservation. Tyrek fights in bursts, Chuck explained. Explosive. High-energy combinations. Spectacular to watch. Devastating when they land. But they require tremendous output. Elena nodded. And output means eventual fatigue. Exactly. His style is designed for quick victories. When they don't come, the energy expenditure becomes a liability. They moved through drills focused on defensive positioning, subtle weight shifts, minimal movements with maximum effect. Nothing that would make highlight reels. Everything that would preserve energy and create frustration for an aggressive opponent. Doc Henry arrived with another visitor, Dana Reyes, the commentator. She stood respectfully at the door until Chuck invited her in. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said. I wanted to speak with you off the record. No cameras, no story. Chuck gestured to a bench at the side of the mat. What's on your mind, Dana? She sat down, choosing her words carefully. I've been covering combat sports for 15 years. Before that, I fought professionally. I understand the sport, the psychology. And I'm concerned about what this exhibition might do not to you, but to the culture of martial arts. Win or lose, this spectacle feels like it undermines what you've stood for throughout your career. Chuck considered her words. Tell me, Dana, when you were fighting professionally, what was your purpose? She thought for a moment. To test myself, to improve, to honor the discipline. And now, what do you see as the purpose for many fighters today? Fame, money, social media followers. She sighed. The landscape has changed. The landscape always changes, Chuck said. But the foundations shouldn't. Honor, respect, humility. These aren't outdated concepts. They're timeless principles that make martial arts more than just fighting. Dana leaned forward. So this is about principles? About teaching Tirik a lesson? It's about reminding everyone just Tirik what matters. What lasts. And you think stepping into an octagon with him will accomplish that? Chuck smiled slightly. Sometimes the lesson needs to be delivered in a language the student understands. Dana studied him for a long moment. You know, there's a theory going around online. That you're planning to throw the fight. To let him win and somehow teach him humility through victory. That would be the easy path, Chuck replied. But rarely do easy paths lead to lasting change. So you're planning to win? To beat a champion at his physical peak? Chuck stood up, returning to the mat. I'm planning to show him the difference between winning a fight and understanding one. As the days passed, both men continued their preparations, Tirik with flash and fury, Chuck with quiet determination. The contrast in their approaches could not have been more pronounced. Tirik's training sessions became media events. He brought in sparring partners, specifically chosen to mimic Chuck's height and build. Each session ended with Tirik knocking them out, then mimicking an elderly man's walk to the delight of his entourage. This is going to be the easiest payday of my career, he boasted to reporters. Like taking candy from a grandpa. Tommy tried repeatedly to refocus him on serious preparation, but Tirik's confidence had crossed into arrogance. He dismissed concerns, ignored strategic advice, and continued to treat the upcoming exhibition as a guaranteed highlight reel. Meanwhile, Chuck's preparation remained private, methodical. He worked with Elena on specific scenarios, angles, energy management. Doc Henry monitored his condition daily, ensuring he remained within safe parameters. There was no flash, no media, no pronouncements. Just the quiet discipline of a man who had lived by a code longer than his opponent had been alive. 1 week before the event, the UFC held a final press conference. The contrast between the two fighters had only grown more stark. Tirik arrived in a custom suit, flanked by an entourage, music blaring from portable speakers. Chuck entered alone, dressed simply, acknowledging the room with a polite nod. As questions flew, Tirik dominated the microphone with bombast and predictions. First round knockout, he declared. Might even be the first minute if he comes at me aggressively. Which, let's be honest, he won't. He mimed an old man walking with a cane, drawing laughs from some in the audience. When Chuck's turn came, his responses remained measured, thoughtful. I'm not here to match his youth or his speed, he said simply. I'm here to honor a challenge and perhaps share some perspective that only experience can provide. A reporter pressed him. But how do you expect to compete against someone with such physical advantages? Chuck's response was direct. Fighting isn't just physical. It's mental, spiritual, emotional. The body throws the punch, but the mind decides when, how, and why. Tirik snorted into his microphone. Tell that to all the guys I've put to sleep. Pretty sure their spiritual game didn't help much. As the press conference concluded, the traditional face-off brought them together one last time before the event. Tirik towered over Chuck, leaning down with an exaggerated sneer. Chuck met his gaze calmly, neither intimidated nor antagonistic. 1 week, old man, Tirik said under his breath. Get your medical insurance paid up. Chuck's expression remained steady. 1 week, he agreed. Just enough time for reflection. Reflection on what? On why you're really doing this. Something flickered across Tirik's fascia, momentary crack in the facade of absolute confidence. It disappeared quickly, replaced by his practiced smirk. But not before Chuck noticed it. As they separated, Elena joined her grandfather, walking with him toward the exit. He's getting more outrageous with each appearance, she observed. Like he's trying to convince himself as much as everyone else. Chuck nodded. Fear often masks itself as bravado. You think he's afraid? I think he's beginning to question. And that's the first step toward understanding. In his hotel suite that night, Tyrek paced restlessly, unable to settle. Tommy sat watching him with growing concern. You should be resting, Tommy said. Conserving energy. You've got a week of final prep ahead. Tyrek continued pacing. I don't need rest. I need this fight to happen already. I'm tired of talking. Then maybe stop scheduling media appearances every 6 hours. Tyrek shot him a look. That's business. That's building the brand. That's distraction, Tommy countered. And it's making you sloppy. Your form was off in sparring today. You're over-telegraphing your combinations. Against Chuck Norris? I could telegraph by certified mail and still connect. Tommy stood up. Kid, I've been in this game 30 years. I've seen champions rise and fall. The ones who fall always have the same problem: they start believing their own hype. Tyrek stopped pacing. This isn't hype, this is reality. I'm the best fighter on the planet. Maybe. But Chuck Norris isn't just a fighter. He's something else entirely. Yeah, he's old. Tommy shook his head. He's patient. There's a difference. He spent a lifetime mastering himself before trying to master others. You're still working on the first part. Tyrek flopped onto the couch, suddenly restless. Whatever, man. Philosophy doesn't win fights. No. Tommy agreed quietly. But it might determine what winning actually means. At his much more modest accommodation across town, Chuck sat in meditation. His eyes closed, breathing steady. Elena worked on her laptop nearby, occasionally glancing up at her grandfather with a mixture of concern and admiration. The UFC just sent over the final medical protocols, she said. They're bringing in extra staff, specialized equipment. They're nervous. Chuck opened his eyes. As they should be. But not for the reasons they think. The internet is wild with theories. Half think you're going to surprise everyone with some hidden technique. The other half. She trailed off. Think I'm going to get hurt. Chuck finished for her. That's understandable. Doesn't it bother you? The doubt? The mockery? Ah. Chuck considered the question. Opinions are like weather, Elena. They change constantly and have little bearing on your path if you know where you're going. And where are you going with this? Somewhere, Tyrek needs to see. The week passed quickly. Final preparations. Medical examinations. Promotional obligations. Through it all, the contrast between the two men remained stark. Tyrek growing more bombastic with each appearance. Chuck maintaining his steady calm. The night before the event, Doc Henry performed one final check on Chuck's condition. Physically, you're as ready as you can be, he concluded, packing away his equipment. But I'd be remiss as your doctor and friend if I didn't make one last plea for you to reconsider. Chuck smiled. Your concern is noted, Henry. But some journeys once begun need to be completed. Doc Henry nodded reluctantly. Then remember what we discussed. Energy conservation, minimal exposure, strategic engagement. I remember. As Doc Henry left, Elena sat beside her grandfather. Get some rest, she said. Tomorrow's going to be intense. Chuck looked at her. Do you understand now? Why I accepted this challenge? She thought for a moment. I think so. It's not about winning or losing a fight. It's about preserving something that's being lost, the spirit behind the technique. Chuck nodded. There's hope for the next generation after all. Across town, Tyrek lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his luxury suite. For the first time in weeks, he was alone, in no entourage, no cameras, no audience. Just the quiet and his thoughts. Almost unconsciously, he reached for his phone and pulled up footage of Chuck's old tournament fights again. He watched longer this time, studying the precise movements, the economical footwork, the calm between exchanges. Something about it bothered him, though he couldn't articulate what. He closed the video and tried to sleep, but rest came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of fighting an opponent whose face kept changing sometimes. Chuck, as a young man, sometimes Chuck as he was now, sometimes a mirror image of himself. Tomorrow had arrived. The moment of truth was at hand, and neither man could turn back. The T-Mobile Arena pulsed with anticipation. Every seat filled, a sea of faces illuminated by the glow of the central octagon. Camera flashes peppered the darkness like lightning, capturing the moment from every angle. This wasn't just an exhibition, it was an event, a collision of eras playing out before a global audience. Dana Reyes adjusted her headset in the commentary booth, surveying the scene below. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what may be the most unusual matchup in combat sports history. I'm Dana Reyes, alongside Mike Goldberg for what can only be described as a generational showdown. Her co-commentator nodded. The energy in this arena is unlike anything I've felt before, Dana. It's not just excitement, there's something almost reverential about it. Like everyone knows they're witnessing something that transcends the sport itself. Dana gestured to the divided crowd. And look at this audience, Mike. You've got the younger fans in Tyrik's corner, wearing his merchandise, chanting, "Ghost, Ghost, Ghost." But then you've got this other demographic, older fans, martial artists, veterans all here for Chuck Norris. The respect in their eyes is palpable. The house lights dimmed suddenly, drawing all eyes to the entrance tunnel. Music erupted, a heavy, pulsing beat, with an aggressive bass line. Spotlights swirled as Tyrik, the Ghost Maddox, emerged, arms raised, entourage flanking him like a royal procession. He moved down the walkway with practiced swagger, playing to every camera, acknowledging his fans with exaggerated gestures. His fight shorts gleamed with sponsor logos, his team carrying banners and equipment adorned with his personal branding. And here comes Tyrik Maddox, Dana narrated. Undefeated at 15-0, 12 knockouts. Currently the most marketable fighter in the UFC, and, according to his own assessment, the best combat athlete on the planet. Tyrik entered the octagon, bouncing on his toes, turning to face each section of the crowd with theatrical flourishes. He looked confident, almost casual, as if attending a public appearance rather than preparing for combat. The music faded, and a new anticipation gripped the arena. No entrance music replaced it. Just expectant silence. Then, without fanfare, Chuck Norris appeared at the tunnel entrance, alone, except for Elena and Doc Henry walking slightly behind him. No entourage, no theatrics, just a steady walk toward destiny. The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. Tyrik's younger fans offered scattered boos and taunts, but they were quickly drowned out by a rising chant from the other sections. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The legendary martial artist acknowledged the crowd with a simple nod, but maintained his focus. His fight attire was plain black shorts, no sponsor logos, no flash. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had nothing to prove but something important to demonstrate. And here comes Chuck Norris. Dana's voice had softened with clear respect. Six-time world karate champion. Undefeated for 6 consecutive years during his competitive prime. And perhaps the most influential American martial artist of the 20th century. At 80 years old, he steps into the octagon not as a celebrity, but as a carrier of tradition. Chuck entered the cage with the same steady composure he had shown throughout the build-up. He moved to his corner, where Elena helped him with final preparations. No pep talk, no last-minute instructions, just a supportive presence. Across the octagon, Tyrik performed for the cameras, shadowboxing and flexing. Tommy tried to focus him with quiet words, but Tyrik seemed more interested in playing to the audience than listening to counsel. The referee called both fighters to the center for final instructions. Standing face to face, the physical contrast was stark. Tyrek towered over Chuck, his body honed to physical perfection, muscles defined beneath his skin. Chuck stood relaxed, his frame still solid but bearing the inevitable markers of age. "Remember the modified rules," the referee instructed. 3-minute rounds. Standard MMA scoring. I can and will stop the action at any sign of excess. Protect yourselves at all times. Touch gloves if you want. Tyrek extended his glove with a theatrical smirk. Chuck tapped it lightly, his expression unchanging. "Good luck, Grandpa," Tyrek said, loud enough for nearby cameras to pick up. "You're gonna need it." Chuck said nothing, simply returning to his corner. Dana leaned into her microphone. And there's the final face-off before battle. The contrast couldn't be more clear: youth versus experience. Flash versus substance. Volume versus silence. The fighters took their positions. The crowd hushed. The referee checked both men one final time, then stepped back. "Are you ready?" he asked Chuck, who nodded once. "Are you ready?" he asked Tyrek, who bounced eagerly. The referee sliced his hand through the air. "Begin!" The bell rang, its echo barely fading before Tyrek exploded forward. He came in fast, aggressive, launching a combination of punches designed to overwhelm and intimidate. His movement was fluid, technical, the product of thousands of hours of training. Chuck didn't meet the charge. Instead, he shifted slightly, creating angles, maintaining distance. His movements were minimal, economical. He didn't attempt to match Tyrek's speed or power, he simply wasn't there when the strikes arrived. "Maddox comes out aggressive, looking to make a statement early," Dana commented. "But look at Norris' complete composure. Perfect defensive positioning. He's making Tyrek miss without exerting much energy." Tyrek pressed forward, increasing his output, throwing more combinations, adding kicks to his arsenal. His face began to show frustration as Chuck continued to slip and evade, offering no counterattacks, simply maintaining defensive integrity. "Maddox is throwing everything but the kitchen sink," Dana's co-commentator observed. "But Chuck is showing masterclass defensive movement. This isn't about athleticism, it's about positioning, timing, and reading your opponent." A minute into the round, Tyrek managed to corner Chuck against the cage. He launched a flurry of strikes, some partially connecting. The crowd gasped, then roared as Tyrek smiled, finally landing clean shots. "You feel that, old man?" he taunted between breaths. "That's real fighting." Chuck absorbed the blows without visible reaction, then executed a subtle shift that created just enough space to slip away from the cage. No panic, no wild movements, just calm, practiced technique. "Extraordinary," Dana marveled. "Chuck takes a few shots but doesn't break position or composure. And look how efficiently he creates space. Minimum movement, maximum effect." As the round continued, a pattern emerged. Tyrek attacking with increasing urgency. Chuck defending with disciplined precision. The younger fighter began breathing harder, his combinations becoming less crisp as frustration mounted. "Tyrek is expending tremendous energy," Dana noted. "His output is impressive, but he hasn't landed anything significant." Meanwhile, Chuck hasn't thrown a single offensive strike yet. He's controlling the pace and distance of this fight through pure defensive mastery. In his corner, Tommy watched with growing concern. "He's making you work too hard," he called out. "Settle down. Find your rhythm." But Tyrek couldn't settle. Each evasion from Chuck fueled his determination to land something decisive. He pressed forward again, launching a spinning kick aimed at Chuck's head. Chuck ducked it smoothly, and for the first time counterate a simple, straight punch to Tyrek's midsection as he recovered from the kick. Not powerful, but perfectly timed and placed. Tyrek felt it more than expected, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. The bell rang, ending round 1. In his corner, Tirik gulped water, breathing hard. "He's not doing anything," he complained to Tommy. "Just running and hiding." Tommy shook his head. "He's making you miss, making you work, forcing you to fight on his terms. Stop chasing and start thinking." Across the octagon, Chuck sat calmly while Elena checked him over. "You good?" she asked quietly. Chuck nodded. "He's strong, fast, but predictable. You took some shots. Necessary information." The bell for round 2 rang. Tirik emerged more focused, his initial frustration channeled into determination. He approached more methodically this time, cutting off the cage, forcing Chuck to engage rather than evade. For the first time, Chuck began offering occasional counter-simple, direct strikes delivered with surgical precision. Nothing spectacular, nothing that would make highlight reels. But each landed with surprising effectiveness, disrupting Tirik's rhythm. "Now we're seeing a shift," Dana observed. "Chuck isn't just defending, he's answering back. Not with power, but with perfect timing. Each counter is like a teacher's correction, just enough to make a point." Tirik's frustration began to build again. He'd expected an easy victory, a highlight reel knockout. Instead, he faced an opponent who refused to engage on his terms, who made him work for every moment, who answered his most dynamic techniques with simple, efficient counters. "Come on and fight," Tirik shouted, momentarily dropping his hands in exasperation. In that instant, Chuck moved faster than anyone expected. A simple 3-strike combination, delivered with the precision of 60 years of practice. Not powerful, but perfectly placed. The last strike caught Tirik off balance, sending him stumbling backward. The crowd erupted. Chuck returned immediately to his defensive posture, making no attempt to follow up or capitalize on the moment. Tirik's eyes flashed with anger. He charged forward, abandoning technique for raw aggression. Chuck slipped the wild attacks, occasionally adding a counter that seemed designed not to hurt, but to instruct. "What we're witnessing isn't just a fight," Dana said, her voice hushed with respect. "It's a physical dialogue. Tirik speaks with aggression and power. Chuck answers with efficiency and timing. 2 generations, 2 philosophies, communicated through the most primal form of expression." As round 2 neared its end, Tirik finally connected with a solid combination, backing Chuck against the cage. The crowd roared as Tirik poured on the pressure, landing several clean strikes. For a moment, concern flashed across the faces of Elena and Doc Henry. But Chuck weathered the storm with the composure of a man who had faced far worse. No panic, no wild counters, just disciplined defense until the bell rang. In his corner, Tirik was jubilant. "I've got him now," he told Tommy. "He's feeling those shots. 1 more round and he's done." Tommy wasn't convinced. "You landed, yes. But look at him. He's not hurt. He's not tired. He's exactly where he wants to be." "Where's that? Losing?" "This isn't about winning or losing for him. That's what you're missing." Across the octagon, Doc Henry checked Chuck thoroughly. "You took some hard shots there. Any dizziness? Vision issues?" Chuck shook his head. "I'm fine, Henry." Elena studied her grandfather's face. "What's the plan for round 3? Chuck took a sip of water. "Time for the lesson." The bell rang for the final round. The arena buzzed with anticipation. Tirik came out aggressive again, confident after his strong finish to round 2. But something had changed in Chuck's demeanor, subtle but noticeable to those who knew what to look for. He was no longer purely defensive. Each movement now had dual purpose, just avoiding damage, but setting up precise counters. His timing seemed to anticipate Tirik's attacks before they launched. "Something shifted," Dana observed. "Chuck isn't just reacting anymore. He's dictating the exchanges. Look at his positioning, he's baiting Tirik into specific attacks." Tyrek launched a powerful combination. Chuck slipped the first two strikes, parried the third, and delivered a clean counter that stopped Tyrek momentarily in his tracks. Not a knockout blow, just perfectly placed, precisely timed. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Tyrek's face. He had thrown everything in his arsenal, and while he'd landed some shots, he hadn't dominated as expected. Now, this 80-year-old man was not just surviving but answering back with techniques that seemed to expose holes in his game he didn't know existed. "Getting tired, kid?" Chuck asked quietly. The first words he'd spoken in the octagon. Tyrek's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with renewed determination. He charged forward with a flying knee, spectacular, powerful, designed to end the fight in highlight reel fashion. Chuck stepped aside with minimal movement, letting the attack miss by inches. As Tyrek landed off balance, Chuck delivered three precise strikes: shoulder, solar plexus, knee, that sent the younger fighter staggering backward. The crowd erupted, many rising to their feet. This wasn't just competitive, it was masterful. "Unbelievable," Dana exclaimed. Chuck Norris just countered one of the UFC champion's signature moves with textbook precision. This isn't about athleticism, it's about mastery. About understanding the fundamental principles of combat that transcend age and rule sets. Tyrek regained his footing, a new emotion visible on his face, no just frustration or anger, but confusion, doubt. For the first time, he was questioning his assumptions, his approach, perhaps even his understanding of what fighting truly meant. Chuck sensed the shift. He moved forward for the first time in the fight, not aggressively but purposefully. His hands up, his balance perfect, his eyes locked on Tyrek with unwavering focus. Tyrek backed up another first. He launched a desperate combination, but his technique had deteriorated, his movements telegraphed by emotion rather than strategy. Chuck slipped the wild strikes and, in one fluid sequence, executed a perfect combination, simple, direct, but delivered with the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime dedicated to martial arts. The final strike, a straight right hand, connected cleanly to Tyrek's jaw. The champion's eyes glazed momentarily. His legs buckled. He dropped to one knee, catching himself before falling completely. The arena exploded in sound cheers, gasps, shouts of disbelief. Chuck stepped back, making no attempt to follow up. He simply waited. Hands still up. Expression unchanged. Tyrek looked up, vision clearing, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. He had been dropped not by some spectacular technique, but by fundamental principles executed with perfect timing. The referee moved between them, checking Tyrek's condition. "Are you good to continue?" Pride drove Tyrek back to his feet. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his eyes told a different story. The fight resumed, but something fundamental had changed. Tyrek no longer attacked with reckless abandon. Chuck no longer focused solely on defense. They circled each other, engaged in brief exchanges, each studying the other with new awareness. In the final 30 seconds, their eyes met during a clinch. Something passed between them, not words, but understanding. The bell rang, ending the exhibition. The crowd rose to its feet, applause thundering through the arena. Not for the spectacle they had expected, but for the lesson they had witnessed. Dana's voice carried over the broadcast, thick with emotion. "What we've just witnessed transcends winning and losing. This wasn't just a fight, it was a demonstration of what martial arts, at its core, truly represents. Not flash, not dominance, but mastery of self before attempting to master others." In the center of the octagon, Tyrek and Chuck stood as the referee held their wrists, waiting for the decision. But in that moment, the official result seemed almost irrelevant. Something more important had already been decided. Sweat dripped from Tyrek's face as he stood at the center of the octagon, waiting for the official decision. His breathing had steadied, but his mind raced. The fight hadn't gone as planned, not even close. He had landed shots, yes. He had even controlled portions of the action. But the narrative he'd constructed, the easy victory, the highlight reel knockout, the validation of his era over the past had crumbled with each minute. Beside him stood Chuck Norris, composed as ever. His breathing was controlled, his posture relaxed but alert. If he was tired or hurt, he showed no sign. His eyes remained focused, present the eyes of a man who had remained exactly who he was, regardless of circumstance. The referee held both men's wrists as the announcer's voice boomed through the arena. After 3 rounds in this special exhibition match, we go to the judges' scorecards. Judge Rodriguez scores the bout 29-28 for Maddox. Judge Williams scores it 29-28 for Norris. And Judge Thompson scores it 29-29, a draw. The crowd's reaction was mixed cheers, boos, confused murmurs. "We have a split draw, ladies and gentlemen." Dana Reyes leaned into her microphone. "A split draw, and honestly, that feels appropriate. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about demonstrating 2 approaches to combat. 2 philosophies, 2 eras." The referee released both fighters' wrists. The customary moment had arrived when opponents embrace, acknowledge each other, put the conflict behind them. Everyone watched, wondering how Tyrek would handle this moment of truth. The champion stood frozen for a second, processing. Not just the decision, but everything that had transpired over the past 3 rounds. He had entered the cage certain of his superiority, his invincibility. He left it questioning everything he thought he knew. Chuck extended his hand first, a simple gesture, neither triumphant nor condescending. Just respectful. Tyrek hesitated, pride warring with the revelation still unfolding within him. Then slowly, he took the offered hand. The handshake was brief, professional. But as they separated, something compelled Tyrek to speak. "You could have finished me," he said quietly, so only Chuck could hear. "That right hand. You pulled it." Chuck met his gaze. "This wasn't about finishing you. It was about starting something." "Starting what?" "Your real education." Before Tyrek could respond, Chuck turned and walked toward his corner, where Elena waited with a towel and water. No victory lap, no playing to the crowd. Just the quiet dignity that had defined his approach from the beginning. In the commentary booth, Dana struggled to contain her emotion. "In 30 years covering combat sports, I've never seen anything quite like this. Chuck Norris just gave a master class not just in fighting technique, but in what it means to be a martial artist. The control, the precision, the purpose behind every movement." Her co-commentator nodded. "And what's remarkable is how he never tried to match Tyrek's strengths. He didn't try to be faster or more powerful. He simply used fundamental principles: timing, distance, efficiency to neutralize those advantages. That's the lesson here," Dana continued. "True martial arts transcends physical attributes. It's about mastering principles that don't fade with age or change with trends." In his corner, Tommy wrapped a towel around Tyrek's shoulders. "You good?" he asked, studying his fighter's face. Tyrek nodded slowly, but his expression was different. The cocky smile replaced by something more thoughtful, more introspective. "He made me look like a beginner," he said quietly. "No," Tommy corrected. "He made you look like someone with more to learn. There's a difference." Across the octagon, Doc Henry checked Chuck's vital signs while Elena wiped sweat from her grandfather's brow. "Any dizziness? Disorientation?" Doc Henry asked professionally. Chuck shook his head. "I'm fine, Henry. You took some hard shots in there. Necessary lessons. For both of us." Elena studied her grandfather. "Did you get what you wanted out of this?" Chuck glanced across the cage at Tyrek, who sat staring at the mat, his usual entourage giving him space. "That depends on what happens next." The post-fight interviews began. The UFC commentator approached Chuck first, Microphone extended. Chuck Norris, at 80 years old, you just went 3 rounds with the current UFC champion. Many expected this to be one-sided, but you more than held your own. What was your strategy going in? Chuck took the microphone with a nod of thanks. There's a saying in martial arts. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. I've been training for over 60 years. That gives you certain insights that can't be taught quickly or learned from watching videos. At any point, were you concerned about the age difference or physical disadvantage? Fighting isn't just physical, Chuck replied calmly. It's mental, emotional, spiritual. The body executes, but the mind decides. The heart commits. The spirit endures. And what would you say to those who criticize this exhibition as dangerous or inappropriate given the age gap? Chuck smiled slightly. Risk is part of growth. Comfort is the enemy of progress. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from the most uncomfortable situations. Any final thoughts on your performance or the decision? The decision is irrelevant, Chuck said simply. What matters is what each of us takes from this experience. What we learn. How we grow. He handed the microphone back and returned to his corner, where Elena waited with his jacket. The commentator then approached Tyrek, who had finally risen from his stool. The champion looked different, this usual swagger subdued, his expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. Tyrek, you entered this exhibition as the heavy favorite. You landed some solid shots, controlled portions of the action, but seemed frustrated at times. What was your experience like in there with Chuck Norris? Tyrek took the microphone, but for once, didn't immediately launch into his practiced bravado. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It was educational, he finally said. I came in thinking this was about proving something, showing that my era is better, faster, stronger. But that's not what happened in there. Can you elaborate? What did happen in there? Tyrek looked across the octagon at Chuck, who was quietly conversing with Doc Henry. I've knocked out 12 opponents. I've dominated champions. But in there, with him, it was like fighting a different kind of opponent. Not stronger or faster, but wiser. The crowd hushed, surprised by this uncharacteristic reflectiveness. He never fought my fight, Tyrek continued. He made me fight his. Every time I thought I had him, he showed me a gap in my game I didn't know existed. Not with flashy techniques, just perfect basics. So what's your takeaway from this experience? Tyrek's eyes remained on Chuck. That I've been focusing on the wrong things. Winning fights. Getting attention. Building my brand. But the real challenge isn't beating opponent seats, mastering yourself. He handed the microphone back, leaving the commentator visibly surprised by this shift in perspective. As the arena began to empty, 2 scenes unfolded simultaneously. In his locker room, surrounded by his team, Tyrek sat quietly. The usual post-fight celebration was absent. No music. No entourage taking selfies. No immediate social media posts boasting of his performance. You're being too hard on yourself, his manager said, breaking the silence. It was a draw. Against Chuck Norris. That's still a story we can work with. Tyrek looked up. Is that all you got from this? A story to work with? I'm just saying, we can spin this. Young champion shows respect to legend. People love that narrative. It's not a narrative, Tyrek replied, a new edge in his voice. It's a wake-up call. Tommy, who had been quietly wrapping hand wraps, nodded with approval. Now you're getting it, kid. Getting what? What Chuck was trying to show you. What I've been trying to tell you. Fighting isn't just about who hits harder or moves faster. It's about who understands the deeper principles. Who masters themselves before trying to master others. Tyrek stared at his hands, the same hands that had knocked out 12 professional fighters, that had earned him millions. that had failed to dominate an 80-year-old man. "I need to learn more," he said quietly. Tommy smiled slightly. "That's the first step." Meanwhile, in the corridor leading to the parking area, Chuck walked alongside Elena and Doc Henry. His pace was steady, his demeanor unchanged from before the fight. If he was tired or sore, he concealed it perfectly. "The media is going crazy," Elena said, checking her phone. "Social media too. Everyone's calling it a moral victory, saying you taught him a lesson, that age and wisdom beat youth and power." "They're missing the point," Chuck replied. "This wasn't about beating him, it was about reaching him." "Did you reach him?" Chuck considered the question. "I opened a door. Whether he walks through it is his choice." Doc Henry chuckled. "Always the teacher, Chuck. Even in retirement. Some callings don't retire, Henry." As they approached the exit, a voice called from behind them. "Mr. Norris." They turned to find Tyrek jogging down the corridor, alone. No entourage, no cameras, just the fighter, still in his fight shorts and a simple t-shirt. Chuck nodded to him. "Tyrek." The younger fighter shifted his weight, suddenly less certain than he'd been during weeks of bombastic press conferences. I wanted to say." He struggled to find the words, pride still battling with the revelation he'd experienced in the cage. "You don't need to say anything," Chuck assured him. "No, I do." Tyrek took a deep breath. "That wasn't just a fight for you, was it? It was a lesson. Every fight is a lesson if you're paying attention." "I wasn't. Not until tonight." Tyrek looked down, then back up, meeting Chuck's gaze directly. "I called you out because I thought beating a legend would make me one. But that's not how it works, is it? No. Legends aren't made by who they beat. They're made by what they stand for, what they represent." Tyrek nodded slowly. "I'd like to learn more. About the old ways. The foundations." A small smile crossed Chuck's face, the first real smile he'd shown since the whole saga began. "Tomorrow. 6 a.m. The gym on Charleston Boulevard. No cameras, no entourage. Just you and the basics. I'll be there." Chuck extended his hand. Tyrek took it. But this time the handshake was different. Not the perfunctory gesture after the fight, but a genuine connection, a passing of respect from one generation to another. As they separated, Elena watched with understanding dawning on her face. "That's what this was really about," she said as Tyrek walked away. "Not defending your honor or proving him wrong, but reaching him, teaching him." Chuck nodded. Sometimes the student isn't ready until they've been humbled, until they realize how much they don't know. "And you knew that would happen in there?" "I hoped." Doc Henry laughed softly. "Chuck Norris. Still fighting the good fight, just not the one everyone thinks." As they exited the arena, the night air was cool on their faces. The neon lights of Las Vegas blinked and flashed, promising excitement, instant gratification, momentary glory. But Chuck knew, and now perhaps Tyrek was beginning to understand. True achievement isn't found in bright lights or loud acclaim. It's built in quiet gyms and private moments of discipline. It's earned through persistence, humility, and the courage to face your limitations. The real victory wasn't declared in the octagon. It was just beginning. 6 a.m. The small gym on Charleston Boulevard sat quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. No cameras. No spectators. Just the basics: worn mats, simple equipment, mirrored walls reflecting the first hints of daylight filtering through high windows. Chuck Norris moved through a series of forms, the same forms he had practiced for 60 years. Each movement precise, deliberate, refined by decades of repetition. In martial arts, the fundamentals never become obsolete. They only deepen with understanding. The door opened. Tyrek, the ghost, Maddox entered, alone as instructed. No entourage. No social media team. He wore simple workout clothes, a far cry from his sponsored logo-covered fight attire. He hesitated at the edge of the mat, suddenly unsure of his place in this unfamiliar territory. "You're on time," Chuck observed, completing his form before turning to face the young champion. "That's the first lesson." "Punctuality?" Tyrek asked, a hint of his old cockiness surfacing. "Respect," Chuck corrected. "For the process. For tradition. For your own word." He gestured to the mat. "Warm up. Then we'll begin." For the next 2 hours, Chuck guided Tyrek through fundamental stance, balance, breathing, movement. Not the spectacular techniques that made highlight reels, but the building blocks that made those techniques possible. The champion struggled at times, his body conditioned for explosive power rather than sustained precision. "Slower," Chuck instructed as Tyrek rushed through a sequence. "Power comes from control, not speed. Perfect movement first. Speed follows naturally." Tyrek nodded, adjusting his approach. With each correction, each refinement, the shell of arrogance cracked further. Here, in this quiet gym with no audience, no validation except the work itself, a different kind of fighter was emerging. As they finished, both men lightly sweating, Tyrek looked at Chuck with new eyes. "I've been training since I was 12, he said. "But this feels like starting over." "Good," Chuck replied. "The master's mind is the beginner's mind. Always learning, always growing. Would you be willing to teach me more?" Tyrek asked, the question lacking his usual confidence. Chuck studied him for a moment. "That depends. Why do you want to learn?" Tyrek considered the question, searching for an honest answer rather than a performative one. "Because for the first time in my career, I realized how much I don't know. How much I've been focused on results instead of process. On looking good rather than being good." Chuck nodded, satisfied with the response. "Tomorrow. Same time." As news of their training arrangement leaked to the medium possible to keep secret in the age of smartphones and social media, the narrative shifted. What had begun as a spectacle, a clash of eras meant to crown one approach superior, transformed into something more profound, a bridge between generations. 1 week after their fight, Dana Reyes hosted a special broadcast titled Legacy in Motion. The featured segment opened with footage not of the exhibition fight, but of Chuck and Tyrek training together in the small gym. Chuck demonstrating a technique, Tyrek listening with uncharacteristic humility. "What we're witnessing," Dana explained to her audience, "is something remarkable in combat sports. Not the passing of a torch, as many expected, but the sharing of one. The merging of wisdom and innovation, tradition and evolution." The cameras showed Tyrek, focused and respectful, following Chuck's guidance on a subtle detail of footwork, the same footwork Chuck had used to evade Tyrek's attacks in the octagon. 3 weeks ago, Tyrek the Ghost Maddox called out Chuck Norris with disrespect bordering on contempt. Dana continued. Today, he studies under him, learning the foundations that transcend eras, rule sets, and fighting styles. In studios and online forums, opinions divided. Some fans criticized Tyrek for going soft, for abandoning the brash persona that had made him marketable. Others praised his humility, his willingness to learn, to evolve beyond the superficial. Tyrek's social media, once dominated by boastful training videos and sponsor promotions, fell quiet for days. When he finally posted again, the content was markedly different, a simple video of him practicing a fundamental form with a caption that read, "The journey never ends, just begins again at a deeper level." In the comments, Chuck Norris's rarely used official account replied with a single word, "Progress." The post received more engagement than any knockout highlight Tyrek had ever shared. At the UFC Performance Institute, Tyrek's training sessions with Tommy Cavanaugh evolved as well. The flashy combinations designed for cameras gave way to more methodical work focused on efficiency, timing, control. "You're moving differently," Tommy observed as Turek worked the heavy bag. "More grounded." Turek nodded, continuing his sequence. "Chuck says power isn't generated, it's channeled. From the ground, through the core, into the technique." Tommy smiled slightly. "I've been telling you that for years." "I wasn't ready to hear it." "And you are now?" Turek paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Lusingor not winning against an 80-year-old man will change your perspective." "You didn't lose to age," Tommy corrected. "You faced mastery. There's a difference." Meanwhile, Chuck returned to his normal routine teaching select students, maintaining his discipline, living the principles he had demonstrated in the octagon. The media attention faded for him more quickly, which suited his nature. He had never fought for recognition. Elena noticed the subtle change in her grandfather after the exhibition, not physical, but spiritual. A certain satisfaction, a sense of purpose fulfilled. "You never doubted the outcome, did you?" she asked him one evening as they shared dinner. "Even when everyone else thought you were risking too much?" Chuck considered the question. "I didn't focus on outcomes, I focused on process. On being present in each moment." "But you knew he would learn the lesson." "I knew there was a lesson to be learned. Whether he grasped, it was up to him." Elena smiled. "Well, from what I've seen of his training videos lately, I'd say he's grasping it pretty well. He has potential beyond what he's shown, beyond what he believed of himself." "Because of you." Chuck shook his head. "Because he was finally ready to see it for himself." 2 months after the exhibition, the UFC announced Turek's next title defense. The pre-fight press conference revealed a champion transformed. Still confident, still assured of his abilities, but with an underlying humility that had been noticeably absent before. When asked about the change in his demeanor, Turek answered thoughtfully, "I used to think fighting was about dominating others. Now I understand it's about mastering yourself. About becoming better today than you were yesterday." A reporter followed up. "And you're training with Chuck Norris? Is that continuing?" "Twice a week," Turek confirmed. "The fundamentals never get old. They just get deeper." "Has it affected your preparation for this title defense?" Turek nodded. "I'm a more complete fighter now, more efficient. I waste less energy on things that don't matter in training and in life." When the fight came, the difference was evident to anyone familiar with Turek's previous style. The flash remained, the athleticism undeniable. But now there was something more: a composure, a precision, a strategic patience that elevated his performance beyond mere physical dominance. He won by submission in the 4th round, not with overwhelming force, but with technical mastery and perfect timing. As the referee raised his hand, Turek's celebration was noticeably different. No taunting, no excessive showboating, just the satisfied acknowledgement of work well done. In his post-fight interview, he credited his evolution. "I want to thank my coaches Tommy Kavanagh, who's been with me from day one, and Chuck Norris, who showed me that true strength isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how well you control yourself when hitting isn't the answer." The camera cut to Chuck, seated quietly at ringside, acknowledging the mention with a simple nod. Later that year, Chuck received an invitation to the opening of Turek's new training center in his hometown of Detroit. Not a flashy fight gym with his name in neon, but a community dojo focused on teaching at-risk youth the principles of martial arts: discipline, respect, perseverance. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Turek spoke to the gathered crowd of young people and community members. "When I started fighting, I thought it was about being the toughest, the loudest, the one everyone feared or envied. I was wrong." He gestured to Chuck, who stood nearby. "This man taught me that real strength isn't measured by knockouts or championships or social media followers. It's measured by impact, by how many lives you improve, how much wisdom you share, how well you embody the principles you claim to represent. As Chuck stepped forward to cut the ribbon alongside Tyrek, cameras captured the moment, not just the action, but the meaning behind it. The torch wasn't passed or taken. It was shared, its flame lighting a new path without extinguishing the old. In the months and years that followed, both men continued their journeys, Chuck as the living embodiment of timeless tradition, Tyrek as the bridge between that tradition and the evolving landscape of combat sports. The exhibition that had begun as spectacle had transformed into legacy, not the legacy of who won or lost on a particular night, but the enduring legacy of principles that transcend generations. Respect earned rather than demanded. Strength measured in character rather than conquest. Wisdom valued alongside innovation. One evening, after a training session with promising students at the Detroit Center, Tyrek and Chuck sat together, watching the next generation practice their forms. "I've been thinking about our fight," Tyrek said. "About what you told me afterward, that it wasn't about finishing me, but starting something." Chuck nodded, his eyes on the students. "And has it?" Tyrek looked around the dojo, the young faces focused on their practice, at the walls adorned not with his championship belts, but with principles written in both English and Korean. Integrity, perseverance, self-control, indomitable spirit. "It started something bigger than I ever imagined," he admitted. "Something that might outlast any title or record. That," Chuck said quietly, "is the true measure of victory." As twilight settled outside, the sounds of practice filled the dojo's rhythm of discipline, the cadence of growth, the harmony of respect. Not the roar of spectators or the thrill of momentary glory, but something deeper, steadier, more enduring. The echo that lasts. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.